Paul Walker, class of 767.
Okay, and how did you end up here at Fort Eustis at OCS?
It's the luck of the draw, I suppose. Went to basic training first in Fort Leonard Wood, went to advanced infantry training at Fort Jackson, and then waited around for an assignment because I knew I was going to OCS, but I didn't know when or where. So I was in the MP barracks for a month and served as a clerk typist, and then they sent me to Fort Eustis.
How did you know you were going to OCS? Did they tell you that when you didn't?
In basic training, they first asked if I wanted to be a helicopter pilot, and I said, sure. So I took the test, and they said, your eyes aren't good enough. So then the next thing was, well, you're also eligible to go to OCS. Would you want to do that? And I said, yeah, that sounds okay. So shortly before the end of basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, they came back around and said, well, we've relaxed the standards for helicopter pilots, so you can do either one. Well, by then I knew that helicopter pilots were not very safe, so I decided to go to OCS. Never regretted it. Although I could have perhaps had a career in aviation if I had stayed with the helicopter deal, but you got to survive also.
10,000 helicopters are lost.
10,000 helicopters. How many pilots?
I don't know, but yeah, more than one.
10,000. That's amazing.
And they don't go down easy.
No, no.
So, what do you recall from the OCS experience when someone asked you, what was it like? What do you tell them?
It was like a pressure cooker. They continually built the pressure, trying to make sure that you were mentally and physically ready to take on the responsibilities. That's probably as good an explanation as any.
Did you, were you interested in transportation beforehand, or was it something that you kind of grew into, or was it just something
It was just a random assignment. I knew very little about the military. My dad, of course, had served in the Second World War, but he never spoke of it.
So what was your best memory here, if there was a best memory?
The camaraderie, the teamwork. One of the most vivid memories is toward the end of the program, my alter ego, whose name was John Walker, we were Walker P and Walker J. In fact, they mixed it up and I've got his picture on my card instead of mine. We, on a weekend, had gone to town. Like young men do, we went to town, we had a great time. On the way back, we decided we were hungry and we stopped at a Greek restaurant nearby. I don't remember exactly where, but we were throwing our money on the counter, deciding what we could get to eat. I think we settled on 2 cups of coffee and 1 grilled cheese sandwich to split. And the owner proceeded to bring out an entire Thanksgiving dinner with turkey and potatoes and gravy, all at no charge, because we were wearing our uniform. I guess. Felt sorry for us. Maybe he was afraid we were a little impaired and wouldn't make it back without sustenance.
So, when you left OCS, where did you go and what was your assignment?
Well, the Army is very wise, as you know. They sent me to a tank battalion at Fort Hood, Texas. Tanks need support, so I had a platoon of tankers and trucks, 5-ton trucks and fuel trucks, and that was my responsibility for probably nearly 2 years. Toward the end of the 2 years, they assigned me as the battalion, or the supply and transport company's S4 officer as a lieutenant. Of course, there was a shortage of company grade officers, so that's how I finished it out.
So it was just a 2-year stint down there?
2-year stint at Fort Hood. I say I fought the battle of Fort Hood.
So you and Colleen got to be good friends.
That's right, Colleen and Temple. You know about Colleen and Temple, I take it.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And West Fork.
In Copper's Cove.
Yeah. So, so, and I'm sure if I ask you it in this way, but what was the lesson, or the biggest lesson I think that you took away from having spent time at OCS?
Oh, I think I grew up a lot. I was 21 when I entered OCS. I was still barely 21 when I left OCS, but I was a much older person by then, much more mature.
And our last question, which I usually ask, is what is the story, if you have any, that you tell at parties or reunions about being at OCS?
You know, in my circle of friends, most of them never served, so the subject doesn't come up.
Okay.
I've told my kids about some of the things that happened, like the sneaking in hamburgers and ungodly number of push-ups you do in a day and how far you run every day. And
Inspired them to join as well, I take it, huh?
none of them have. 3 daughters and a son who doesn't have the health for it. So, but I enjoyed my time in the military. I enjoyed Texas. Another officer that we shared a house for almost a year, and he was from South Texas. And of course, you know, time is short, so we'd leave Fort Hood at noon on Saturday and drive 350 miles to the valley and then come back.
So where are you from originally?
Northeast Missouri, a little town north of St. Louis, a couple hours, called Monroe City, which is near Hannibal, if you've ever heard of Hannibal, the boyhood home of Mark Twain. In fact, the birthplace of Mark Twain is only about 12 miles from our home as the crow flies. A little town called Florida, which you probably have heard of if you've read any of the Mark Twain books.
I think we're good.
They're great.
All right.
All righty.
Painless?
Painless.
All right.
No scars.
No, I just do need you to. It's because it's the Army, and it's the way things are in the real world, too.
My mother cried when my dad got orders to Fort Hood. She cried.
Really?
Well, in those days it was not, I mean, it was really out in the middle of nowhere.
But it's not.
Well, it's now the largest base in the country. So,
Well, I'm
I
just
mean,
saying
the
it's
largest
still in the
railroad
middle
base.
of
Oh,
nowhere.
yeah, it is. Beautiful downtown Fort.
You need the full address?
We can just put town, state. It's just more just acknowledge that you actually agreed to doing it.
We actually live on a farm that my wife grew up on, built a home there 12 years ago.
Wow.
And oddly enough, my dad had lived there when he was out of high school.
Yeah,
He
that's,
had moved in, one of his aunts owned the place at the time. So
well, that was meant to be now, wasn't it?
we're wedded to the
Sorry.
land.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you,
think
sir.
I can find my way out of here?
Yes, I just want to interview.
I'm right here.
Fast and Furious. Just be
So-
careful on the cable.
What is it you really want to hear?
I want to hear it. Everybody's been polite. Tell us the dirties, the down and dirty.
Tell us what?
Tell us, tell us the really bad, the down and dirty details.
There are no down and dirty
Oh,
details.
well.
So are you interested in OCS?
Yes.
Or what OCS meant to me, or
Yes.
what it did for me?
Yes.
All the above?
All of the above.
Check, check, check.
Okay, so I'll start at the beginning.
You gotta wait
So
for me
what,
though.
you gotta wait for her, you gotta wait for me.
Sure.
And you need to start first off by telling me who you are and what class you're